Es ist Montag, den 18. Januar und ich möchte eine schnelle Screencast über deutsche Musik vorstellen. So, ähm, lass uns sehen. Zuerst lass uns eine Zeitstrahl anschauen. So, und wir können fragen, wann ist alles passieren? Musik ist wie Kunst in die verschiedenen Perioden, aber es gibt ein bisschen andere Datumen. Und ja, aber wir fangen mit Musik in die Mittelalter an. So 476 bis 1475, das ist 1000 Jahre. Ganz lange Zeit. Und im 476, das ist ein ganz genaues Datum. Weißt du warum? Ja, das ist als die Untergang des Römischen Reichs. That's the downfall of the Roman Empire. 476 in the West. And we call the 1,000 years after that the medieval period. As we learned in art and in the rise of cities, the Renaissance has its beginnings going back to the start of the 1400s. We really do start to see that rebirth that is flourishing by the time the 16th century comes around. But yeah, this timeline marks it at 1475, fairly arbitrary. 476 is not arbitrary at all. Renaissance is a rebirth of what? Ancient Rome and Greece and the society that had flourished then. We have from 1600 to 1750 a period termed as Baroque, and we saw that in art too. There is Rococo in music, but it's the things that we still listen to today are firmly planted in the Baroque. Classical, what we call classical, is really neoclassical. 1750 to roughly 1820, I would say more or a little earlier. We start to see the shift to the Romantic period, lasts a good 100 to 80 or 100 years. And then starting in about 1900, we come into the modern era. We're not going to focus as much on modern as we did with art. We're not really going to focus a lot on Renaissance. We're going to kind of center ourselves in the Baroque, Classical, and Romantic periods. And look at 5 different works by 5 different artists. You can already find those on Power School in the Musik page. They are listed there. Go ahead and give those a listen, familiarize yourselves. But this is going to be an introduction to some of the periods. I think I am going to make it a 2-part series just so we don't bore ourselves to death. All right, so let's talk about medieval. We're, again, talking about 1,000 years, sometimes called the Dark Ages, and that's not because the weather was any different or because they hadn't invented candles yet. It's because a lot of the recorded history, the written history has been lost or simply not found. So when we talk about dark, it's because we have a lack of information. But in the late Middle Ages, we have quite a bit of information about the way society was structured and some surviving works. And we also can reasonably assume how music sounded during the medieval period. If we go back to the classical period, the truly classical period of Greece and Rome, we don't really know. We don't have compositions. There's a couple, but we can only guess based on the technology available, the surviving archaeological evidence with instruments. Medieval period, we have music written down. Um, it is both sacred and secular. All right, it's a lot of monophonic chants. There's a particularly German genre called the Minnesang, which talks about courtly love or topics of chivalry. So, like a knight doing brave or heroic things to honor his family or his a lady. They're fairly boring, in my opinion, but some are survive and are still studied. Um, as far as medieval, developed to incorporate multiple lines of music performed independently. So there wasn't a lot of thought to how the whole piece works, but more how different parts work on their own and then perform those together. And it does work together, but it's sort of backwards engineered. Music spread by the church. All right, so our main places to listen to music, if we think church, fairs, festivals, public spaces, we have probably different music. A lot of the surviving music is what survived from court, so the royalty and the nobility, and from the church. We don't have a ton of the popular works because those would have been spread by traveling musicians and poets called troubadours. Um, we have consorts, which are small groups in the same musical family playing, and they might travel together, might stay locally and play. It does depend on circumstance. So medieval period, um, important figure is Hildegard von Bingen. She's a fascinating figure in German history. A saint, a polymath, so she was good at lots and lots of things, and a composer. Um, Heinrich von Friedrich von Hausen, don't really know that well. Walter von der Vogelweide, I had to read some of his poems in college. Heinrich von Weldeke, never heard of him really until I was researching important medieval figures in German music. And Martin Luther is hugely important because of his help to spread German language through music and through hymnals. So Luther gets on the scene in 1517. The hymns that he writes a little later in his life become immensely popular and are the most performed hymns still. I mean, Mighty Fortresses Our God, if you're Lutheran, is one of the hits. So Johannes Gutenberg also plays a role by helping print these out, spread them. He's a pretty darn important figure when it comes to medieval hymnal music. All right, so there are some examples. I uploaded this slideshow, and I'm not going to click the links and play them here, but you are certainly welcome to open this slideshow from PowerSchool and listen to these examples. Renaissance, let's talk. 1500, 1600, a little earlier, a little later, but mostly rooted in the 16th century. And we've talked already about some of the societal changes and upheaval. We haven't talked a lot about the resulting conflicts of the Protestant Reformation that tore Germany especially apart during the late 1500s and early 1600s. So for many places in Europe, this was a great leap forward. For many people, the Renaissance was the most terrifying time they'd ever been alive because of the amount of war and conflict. In music, we have the introduction of harmony and polyphony, so two or three interrelated parts played or sung simultaneously to achieve sort of the same a unique chord or note. Development of major and minor scales. Now, some of you listening know much more about music than I do. I had to have some students explain. Every year I have to have students explain major and minor scales. I still don't understand what they are. I know minor is sad. But a couple of you listening are, if I tried to explain it, you would tell me I'm wrong, and I would be embarrassed. So I'm going to just tell you that the Renaissance is when that happened primarily. We also are in a golden age for choral and a cappella compositions. So the voice is the primary instrument that we're writing Renaissance music for. We do have other instruments, stringed instruments, early forms of the piano, but we're fairly limited a lot of wind instruments, but we're limited by the technology of the Renaissance, and it's not till the Baroque that we get the set pieces that will help us create a modern symphony. Johannes Gutenberg, Martin Luther, we talked about, and we've got advancements in keyboard technology later on in the Renaissance leading us into the Baroque. Things like harpsichords, clavichords come about during the Renaissance and really help bridge us into the Baroque music, which is characterized in a lot of ways by the organ, as well as different pianoforte pieces. But it's really during the Renaissance and early Baroque, the harpsichord, clavichord that are getting the job done when it comes to keyboards. Some lists. Pachelbel, really early Baroque figure more than a Renaissance. These other people I don't really know that much about. It's difficult to discern authorship of specific songs. Many were lost to history or not transcribed or developed through improvisation. There are some examples on this slideshow I encourage you to listen to, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about Baroque and then and we'll do classical and romantic as a separate part. So Baroque, we've got the foundations for the next 300 years of musical expression. Bolder sounding violin, cello, viola emerge. So these are our big hitters in a modern orchestra. Or string quartet. This is really what we've been working with for 300 years. The harpsichord is different from a piano. You probably know a harpsichord is plucked, like guitar almost, and a piano is hit with the hammer. So the plucking of the strings makes it so you can't really vary the volume or a lot of the vibrations. With a piano you can do a lot more, but the benefit of a harpsichord is it's smaller and you can travel with one, really. A piano is much heavier and harder to get around. So Baroque is really the first time music is written for specific instruments. During the Renaissance, we're writing more so a piece that could be applied to whatever instrument you have. If you have a lute, you play it on the lute. If you have a harp, you play it on the harp. If you have a keyboard, you play it on the keyboard. This is writing works that are fine-tuned towards a particular instrument and then often played together. We have major and minor scales are flourishing. Opera, sonata, concerto, cantata, modern orchestra are born, ornate and highly layered. So the whole point of the Baroque, if we think back to art, and maybe we haven't dove too deep into what the purpose of the Baroque period, but as different churches, different cities, different countries grapple with Luther's ideas on what the church should be, the Catholic Church itself becomes highly concerned with losing patrons and does everything it can to make church more through the art of the time, the decoration, but also through music. And so the Baroque is setting about to make church music as well as secular music, but especially in sacred spaces, as holy and sacred and awe-inspiring as possible. And if we think about two of the big German figures, Johann Sebastian Bach and Georg Friedrich Handel. If you've never heard Handel's Messiah, Go ahead and Google it and listen to part of it. You'll instantly recognize it. Bach has 1,000 different pieces you could listen to, and probably a dozen. If you don't listen to a lot of music, probably a dozen you've definitely heard before. And if you do listen to or play an instrument, um, you've heard dozens of Bach's works. He's highly prolific. And Bach's main job was to compose music for organs, but also to test them. There was a big investment by different churches into new organ technology. And when they would purchase or commission a new organ, Bach would go in and test that thing out. He wrote just constantly, and so there are hundreds and hundreds of works by Bach, um, and we'll kind of dive into one of his most recognizable pieces. George Friedrich Handel, again, Messiah is it's a huge hit at Christmas time. It's a wonderful piece, highly. I mean, can you imagine walking into one of the larger cathedrals that we've seen or you've seen and having a full orchestra, a full choir? We're in the maybe mid 1600s, and just walking in and having that entire space filled with sound. We do see the emergence of concert halls and specific settings for music to be heard and appreciated, but the primary venue in the Baroque period is still definitely the church. Okay, so we're going to get into classical in another part. I'll save maybe have that up probably by Wednesday, but thank you for sitting through my introduction. Those of you who